We think of cloud so much so around infrastructure or application modernization, but there's an incredible opportunity inside the Microsoft Azure cloud to move your DevOps up to the cloud and get incredible performance around reliability, security, and new features across platform. In our next session, we're going to go through the tools and tips for DevOps using Microsoft tools, Microsoft Cloud tools. Billy Schvetz, one of our federal directors, is going to lead you through this session. Billy?
Thank you so much, Steve. So I'm going to talk to you today about how easy it is actually to use the Microsoft tools for your DevSecOps needs. So first I'm going to talk to you about what is DevSecOps. DevOps is the union of people, processes, and tools so that you can get continuous delivery in order to give value to your customers quickly. Now, the security part of that is really just saying that you need to be thinking about that as a mindset throughout your entire process. So you can't separate out security from your development and your operations activities. It should be embedded as part of them. So what does that mean for you? That means you can no longer lob things over the fence from development to operations and say that's their problem, not my problem. It has to be one continuous loop and flow in order for that to continually allow you to deliver your services for it. And then the security part, you have to layer that in at all components. So you're not just handing it over to some security officer at the end saying, hey, I delivered this great application, but you go figure it out if I secured it or not. It should be start at the beginning of your overall process for it. So where do you start with this? So a couple things to note for it. You've heard a lot of buzzwords about DevOps, DevSecOps, all of those things. But what I want to talk to you about some more is to get there, you should really be practicing an agile mindset. If you're doing DevOps, you're likely doing it because you were trying to implement Agile, and to be successful with that, you needed DevOps to help you get there for it. But you don't have to start with all of that in day one. You really just need to start with what you have. So there's a million maturity models out there for you to take a look at, and there's one specifically for DevOps as well, where it highlights where you're at initially, and then you want to grow to where you consider yourself optimized. And that's important to say that where you consider yourself optimized. That can be different per every organization and team. You want to make some things common and consistent, but not everything needs to be the same across everyone else. Maturity happens over time. You don't need to do all of that day one. And the key there is just start with what you have. You don't have to wait for all of it. So most customers have Office 365 available to them. So what I'm going to show you is you don't have to wait to buy some really large kit of things for you to actually be successful with your DevOps and your DevSecOps maturity. You can use Planner. Planner is a fantastic tool within the Office 365 suite that most people don't know about, but it is this great visualization of how to track work. It lets you get what most people have seen as like a Post-it note board where you can pick up tasks and move them over. Planner gives you that in this great interface that you can share with your whole team and track all of these metrics associated to it. Teams is another great tool in the product suite for O365. It is kind of your hero application where you can go and access all of the other tools that you need for your team to be able to collaborate. You can do threaded conversations. You can access your planner board from there. You can IM the engineer that you need to talk to do something and say, hey, can you please take care of this for me? All from Teams, all from one location for it. And the other one is SharePoint. I use SharePoint as my backlog management tool. So everything I need for my project goes on my SharePoint site. Even if I'm doing it for one product or at the portfolio level, if I'm doing scaled agile, I do it all in SharePoint. And the best thing about all of these tools is if I put something in my SharePoint site on the backlog, I can connect all of it with Flow. And that's the final one in this product suite. Flow is the tool that helps you actually not just connect applications, Teams does that for you, but Flow will let you move data between those individual applications. So one of the great things I've put in place for my teams is I'll create my backlog in SharePoint and we'll kind of plan out what we might want to bring into sprint planning in SharePoint. Well, I created a flow that moves all of the tasks or all of the user stories over from SharePoint into the sprint board that I created in Planner, and they can go there and start using it. And they don't have to do anything. I don't have to manually move data over. The flow takes care of all of that for me. So it's just using the tools you already have to kind of manage that process and people side of things before you have to get too sincere and serious about the tool sets that you use. So once you're ready for that, we're going to talk to you about what the planner board looks like. So the planner board, this is the great interface I was talking to you about, where you can just click and drag. It allows you to attach images to it. You can like things. It shows you progress is complete on your individual tasks. This is a great tool for anybody just getting started with Agile or DevOps or DevSecOps. Just to visualize that work, use Planner to help you do that. And like I said, you can use Flow to connect all of those to your other applications, and SharePoint to kind of manage that larger backlog for you. Now, in order to get to the full DevSecOps component, you really need continuous delivery to help you get there. You need the ability to code, build, test, release, and operate to make sure that that's happening in a continuous flow, and that if one developer needs to push something right now, another developer needs to push something 5 seconds from now, both of them can go through the same process just like that, so you're not wasting any time with it. So I'm going to talk to you about Azure DevOps. So this is the kind of a new coined product that Azure offers, and it gives you 5 different products in this suite. Azure Boards is the main application that kind of is the graduate version of Planner. It gives you the ability to manage your entire lifecycle for your requirements. You can connect your code to it using the Azure repo component, which has Git in it. So you can create a user story in your boards, which gives you a Scrum board or a Kanban board or anything that's similar to what you're used to using for your team. And you could write, when you're done writing the code for it, you can connect it to that user story. Then you would use Azure Pipelines, which gives you the ability to create a CI/CD pipeline almost from an interface, right? You're just getting asked questions to say, I want to build a pipeline and build code from this repository and send it through the overall pipeline. I want to connect test scripts to it for the test plans that I've put together in Azure test plans. And then I can also even add artifacts to that. So if I have larger packages that I want to send out, I can connect it through my pipeline, or I can just share it through the rest of the people on my team. So it's a great product suite for you to actually manage that entire life cycle. And you don't have to know a ton of stuff about it to do it. You can set up a pipeline with just answering questions without having to write a ton of code to do it. So there's another tool suite that I want to talk to you about, which is DevTest Labs, which is in Azure. Now, the Azure Gov has DevTest Labs, where Azure Commercial has both Azure DevOps and DevTest Labs. Azure DevOps is coming to Azure Gov for it. So right now, if you're somebody like in the federal space and you can only use Azure Gov, you're going to use DevTest Labs and portions of that O365 model that I just talked to you about to help you through this. But when they're together, they are really better. What it helps you do is provision development and test environments. It helps you manage policies for your development environments that you push out there. And the greatest scenario I can provide for this is if you had a user story that was entered in your Azure boards and you had somebody completed the code for it, it got pushed through the entire CI/CD pipeline that was created in Azure Pipelines, it went through the test plans. Well, you want to spin up a VM there to give to your product owner to actually confirm, hey, is this what I wanted before I release it out to production? You can use DevTest Labs to connect those two together so your pipeline builds out your dev environment and shuts it down after the person has approved it, which is a fantastic tool. You don't have to worry about how long that sits up, somebody shutting it down at the end of the day, how frequently do you need it. You don't need to build a complete integrated test environment. You can just spin it up and shut them down when you need them, connected to the products that you're delivering through Azure DevOps for it. You can also create custom images, so it's not like creating the same thing over and over again. So if you have multiple products that have different tools that they need, you can put that all in your custom image. So another component that they offer in Azure is Secure DevOps kind of as a kit. And what they really have done here is said, don't forget about security. Like we said at the beginning, it's a mindset change. You have to actually incorporate it throughout your entire process. So you can use Azure monitoring, security, the advanced threat protection for Azure, all of those components you want to incorporate into what you're delivering at the almost subscription level. So this is a model that they've provided where you can layer in security at all of the different components. So it's not something that you're being reactive about, you're being proactive for it. So what I've talked to you about is O365, Azure DevOps, and Azure DevTest Labs. And what I have shown you is with the tools you already have available on the O365 side of the house, you can get started today in DevOps, and DevSecOps just by changing the types of tools you're using for managing the people and the processes. If you're not on Agile, if you're not being Agile, if you're not familiar with all of that, O365 can help you get there with Teams, Planner, SharePoint. Use Flow to help move that data around so you're eliminating all of that extra manual steps. And the big key for DevSecOps is you're just reducing the manual steps and increasing the automation so that you can continuously deliver throughout the overall process of your product. Now, if you have Azure DevOps and DevTest labs, it's kind of the best marriage between the products available for you. They're there, they're available, you can use them, set them up very easily. You can use Azure boards to help manage your backlogs. You can check in your code using the Git repository and Azure repos. You can build it with a CI/CD pipeline. You can test it with the test plans. Use DevTest labs to build up your dev environments. All of those things are there, connected. You don't have to do anything extra and spend a ton of time and money on developers or engineers that have to learn DevOps. You can use the tools that really are taking care of those steps for you. Join us now for a conversation that Steve will lead.
Thank you, Billy. Great presentation. I am so glad that we included this session because I think this is one of the areas for big wins that a lot of times our customers aren't thinking about. They're thinking about these productivity tools or the security tools or offloading costs from their data center. But this is like a humongous win opportunity for our customers. So Mark, I'm going to start with you. Mark, you're one of our practice managers in our state and local government business. What are you seeing in terms of customers are on-premise today, using this stuff on-premise today? What do you think some of the big win areas are for them?
That's a great question. I hope we have a lot of time because there's a lot of actually good benefits to moving to cloud. Like any other Microsoft cloud platform, I mean, I think the most obvious win is just the sort of the iterative updates that Microsoft's making over time. They are very, very quickly, they're using agile processes to actually update the DevOps platform. So new features are constantly becoming available, and I think that's a huge positive. Secondarily, I think a great benefit, Billy talked a little bit about Azure DevTest labs, and whether you're using that or cloud-based load testing, just the fact that you don't have to go through the process of setting up virtual machines and putting agents on those machines in on-premise environments saves you colossal amounts of time. So that's definitely beneficial. There's two more I want to cover real quickly. One is just the flexibility of the platform. A lot of our customers are coming from traditional TFS on-premise environments. And you can right out of the gate decide if you want to use TFVC version control for Team Foundation Server or Git right out of the box. It's easy to switch. It's easy to grab new templates to do builds to different environments, and it's just huge amounts of flexibility there. And lastly, and this will maybe be a theme if we discuss it more today, but is just the fact that as it relates specifically to Azure DevOps, if you're a small team with 5 or less developers, you can get started at no cost. You can have an infinite amount of stakeholders also joining in on that process. And so there's just huge wins there. Within minutes, you can actually get an environment set up, get Kanban boards going, get code checked into repos, stuff that would take you hours or potentially days on premise.
You had me at no cost.
Yeah.
So Pete, you're one of our leads on our federal business, and that was actually one of the questions. Is there a dev team too small? Is there one too big? I'm sure too big is not the question, but.
No, I don't think you can really have a team that's too small or too big, but what the DevTest Labs gives you is the ability to scale regardless of the size of your team. So you can start out with a small team and you can grow it into a large team. Additionally, there's a lot of standardization that comes when you apply these templates to developer machines and being able to roll out through a pipeline. You get all of the developers working in the same environments. You don't have a developer that's installed his own system. You don't have somebody standing up rogue servers to accomplish a specific goal. You set the bounds of how they're supposed to work, and they work within that. And now that everybody's working in kind of the same template, you have the ability to integrate your CI/CD and make sure everything flows perfectly. And the cost savings of it is fantastic. You can shut down the developers' machines at 6 o'clock at night and start them up at 6 o'clock in the morning. You can limit the number of VMs a user can set up, or you can organize everything by resource groups, and it's just a fantastic way to give developers the control that they need in order to do development the way that they want to.
And so, Billy, I'm curious, we're working with customers, big and small, large dev teams, small dev teams. What's the kind of path to get started? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's really easy depending on which environment you're in, right? If you can do all of your development in the unclassed environment, so we work a lot in the federal sector where you're dealing with the different levels of security and enclaves, really. On the unclassed side, you can start day one, right? We've actually stood up a development environment where you push a button and an hour later you have a completely deployed development machine with SharePoint installed on it already and all of the dev tools loaded. So developer day one can actually start coding on something, so you don't have to wait 3 weeks like you used to have to in an on-premise situation. And that's kind of where you start. I say you start with one, implementing agile practices. That mindset change is just crucial. You can deploy all these tools out there that you want, but if you haven't changed the way you think about how to break up work, you'll never get past that hurdle. You will always get stuck with, this pipeline does this thing, but it still doesn't deliver working code. Well, that's because you haven't actually changed how you break up your work and deliver that work as well. So start with Agile, start moving into the tools that are already available at no cost to you, and work from there. Now, if that all works in the unclassed environment, in the secret environment and above, it's a little bit different because you have tools rolling out to you. You will have Azure Secret coming out this year, which will dramatically expand the tools available to you. You have GCC for the government community cloud. You have GCC High. Both of those have O365, which is why I showed you what you could do with O365 if you don't have that entire Azure DevOps component for it. So there's tools out there that you can start using to get started in that way. But at a minimum, just start following agile practices, breaking down your work, and everything else will kind of come naturally because you'll have to solve a problem, and you'll solve that problem with DevOps.
So do you need to adopt the whole entire stack all at one time, or?
Absolutely not. I just kind of start with the process and the managing side of it, because if you start trying to tackle the pipeline components and all of that afterwards, you just sort of created a mess for yourself. I always say, start with a team. Make sure you have an actual cross-collaborative team. So you're not just, I have developers here. I don't have anybody that knows how to test, or an engineer, or a security person, or somebody that knows security that can help educate the rest of the team to build that larger mindset on it. You just start there.
Aaron, in your earlier presentation, you talked a lot about the process by which we are helping customers adopt Azure, answering the questions, those customers that are at yes, that just need to go over the hump. How does DevOps how does it fit into that model?
It's a great question. So when we think about cloud readiness is not just an infrastructure type of assessment and engagement. It's really about a holistic data center and operations, including development operations perspective. So a lot of times when we're working with our customers, it's not we work just with operations. We work with operations and development, so we're all on the same page on how to adopt cloud the most efficient and secure way. A lot of times operations, you'll hear them grumble about developers being sort of the wild, wild west. And then you hear about the developers saying we don't have the capabilities we need in order to do the operational efficiency that we believe we need to do. The benefit of having both parts of the organization involved in a cloud readiness enables everybody to be on the same page, and also to implement the framework that everybody will abide to. Enabling agility, enabling different tools such like Visual Studio Team Services or GitHub, or even bigger, which is enabling the protection of both Q&A and production environments from anybody. So setting that up from your foundational aspect is very important, not just from an operations standpoint, but also establishing that from a development standpoint.
And so, Mark, that leads me to a question. So Billy talked a lot how readiness in the federal space, in the state and local space where you spend most of your time, how are you seeing that adoption, and how are you working with organizations to help them through getting started?
Well, to just piggyback quickly on what Aaron was saying, I mean, I also have the privilege of working with the SharePoint team day in and day out, and there we have the notion of governance that we talk about with all of our customers, which is basically operational controls. And the idea of working in an agile, highly efficient DevOps scenario is very similar to developing a governance plan. There needs to be operational controls. I've worked in organizations in the past where if you couldn't get management on board with those, we'd start down a year or two down a development project, and it would lead to utter disaster because the costs were more than what they thought they would be, and the deliverables weren't delivered in the timeline that they thought they would be. And so it's really important to establish that plan up front. I think that's a key part. But not all of our customers necessarily go that path. We were talking a little bit about this earlier. Some of the customers we deal with, they're just putting out an Azure website, or they're setting up an Azure function, and they say, we're kind of getting our feet wet with some of these workloads in Azure. Now we want to wrap an actual process around this. Other customers we talk to, they probably have Subversion, or they might have Git, or they might have TFS on-prem, and now they want to start their journey by just implementing cloud-based DevOps before they spin up their first VM or Azure service. So it kind of can vary.
Pete, what would you say to a customer who said, Mark, that sounds great, Billy, that sounds fantastic, but it feels like a bridge too far for us?
I would tell them to look into ARS, get their systems that are on premises, start moving them up into the cloud, and then it's really as easy as building out pipelines and starting to put policy and practice around what you want to do. Figure out where you want to be, where you are currently, and work yourself there. VSTS or Azure DevOps and DevTest labs, when put together, they're pretty powerful. All of the existing O365 tools, they all have service endpoints into these. So, teams can pull in all of your bug reports into your conversations. It can notify you when somebody's updated a work order or a work item. And, all of these, different areas all come together inside the tools that they already do have. All you just got to do is get out from on-premises into the cloud, and then everything starts coming together.
Don't be afraid. You can do partially, and you can be hybrid.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You also don't have to be a developer or an engineer to do a lot of it. You just have to kind of understand how it works, and that's the beauty of a lot of these tools. Is it's a lot of plug and play and just interfaces. They ask you questions. You can kind of figure out, oh, I want to connect this repository to this pipeline, and you pick what you want the pipeline to do, and it just does it for you. It's kind of nice.
So Aaron, that makes me think then, so again, going back to our earlier dialogue, we discussed the possibility and the importance of when you're getting to Azure, getting to cloud, of choosing a production workload as part of your engagements and getting started. Could this be one of those workloads?
Of course. Setting up a development environment to understand how the foundations work is definitely something that we specialize in. This could be a workload, and I consider development operations a workload. It's no different than IaaS or a web app or anything else. It is truly a workload, how an organization will utilize and realize its potential and value. But that would be a real-world workload to be deployed within Azure and leveraged.
See, I bring that up because it's a mindset change, right? I think so much of our customers, and I think a lot of this ties to the Microsoft pitch too, right? A lot of this is just so focused on Azure that when we say to customers, hey, you should be looking at cloud, we should be becoming cloud ready, they view it as, hey, moving data center. And of course that's a big part of it, but this DevOps is part of your data center.
Absolutely. They forget a lot of the times of all these dev VMs that are out there. And some of them aren't even VMs. Some of them are developer installed all these tools on their local desktop.
Server under the table, right? Yeah.
And they have no control over that or insight into any of it or no security around it, that moving that to the cloud gives them all of those abilities.
And it actually saves them money, right? Because instead of buying these big honking machines or using underutilized VMs that are sucking up resources, like you were saying, we can turn it off, we can turn it up, we can spin it up, we can spin it down. We can only use what we need to use, just like every other cloud benefit, right, associated with that.
Well, a real-world example of that is a lot of our Esri customers that have large Esri desktop overlay systems that they'll spend $3,000, $4,000 on a desktop that's used once out of a year that has to be refurbished every 2 years. Well, now as a developer, I can now say, you know, I need compute that is bigger than I typically would have, and I'm no longer limited to whatever can fit underneath my desk. I mean, if I wanted to, I could do an M-class server that has, you know, 16 cores with 256 gigs as my development machine, so that way I can maybe crunch or maybe do some artificial intelligence or something that's new that requires more compute, but I want to collapse the amount of time it takes for me to realize, you know, my vision. So there's a lot more flexibility for the developer as well, not just from an organization keeping it secure, but the developer being able to say, I can use now whatever I need.
So I want to move a little bit to security because, you know, in these scenarios we're talking about, like you were saying, Billy, sometimes these dev machines are forgotten about, or maybe they exist on our desktop. Maybe we're only using them once in a while. Maybe they don't get pulled into our usual security operations. How do we develop a security mindset around DevOps? Mark, you want to kind of start there?
Sure. As Billy mentioned during your presentation, I think it's starting at the beginning, right, and making sure it's a part of every piece of the puzzle. Making sure that your developers are seasoned developers, or if they're not seasoned developers, that they are able to get up to speed quickly and understand the security ramifications of the decisions that they're making. Yeah, everything from SSL certificates to encryption, you know, at rest, why are those decisions being made and when are they important, right? So that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of it is in some cases there's actual reasons to have security or compliance people on a project. So I talked earlier about the fact that you could have unlimited amounts of stakeholders as part of Azure DevOps. Well, one of those individuals could be a security officer or just someone in your group who's really, really good with that, and they would have basically free access to your pipeline, and they could be part of a gated check-in process, so that before your code gets deployed anywhere, that they have approved it. And so, you know, involving them throughout that process. But of course, a lot of times those decisions are somewhat financial decisions as well. And so just everybody needs to be on the same page of those ramifications.
And how does that relay into the agile, you know, get agile? How does security lay into that?
Yeah, so it's really about building that team of people that can do that, right? It's not saying your teams are these siloed individuals where you're just sort of lobbing it over the fence. It's just like this panel where we have people from all different backgrounds. You know, I stand up with Pete every day, and we're constantly saying, how do we integrate these security people into this process more so it's not an afterthought, it's an integration.
And that's in all aspects, right?
Absolutely, it's everything.
Physical, boxes, the whole 9 yards, right?
Right, that's back to the, you know, it's the union of people, processes, and tools. You really need to focus on those people and processes and then layer in the tools that make the most sense for you to use for that. Because unless you change that mindset and the team structure, you don't have that ever thought of or being paid attention to. And that's the biggest challenge, right? I can't tell me how many things that we look at after the fact and we're like, oh, hey, yeah, no, we completely should have done that first. But you just didn't have the right person there to be like, oh, did you think of this?
I want to come back to you, Pete, because one of the things we were discussing before the panel was, I mean, there's a difference between what's in GCC and GCC High and, of course, GCC Secret coming down. Do you want to address any of that?
So I believe GCC has most of the features that are out there currently. GCC High, Azure DevOps is not currently available in it, and the secret environments for Azure should be coming soon. So there's a lot of you know, coming soon, but you know, they have been delivering very quickly. They, you know, like Mark had mentioned, they are an agile process, so they are, you know, steaming ahead.
So I'm going to go around the panel here. I'd like everybody to, you know, state what they think is the most compelling case to customers who own Microsoft Cloud or about to get into Microsoft Cloud. Why DevOps? Why Microsoft DevOps? Aaron?
Mine is holistic security and overview of all aspects and endpoints within my organization. Having everybody on the same page of managing security, seeing how security needs to be driven within the organization, from applications to operating systems to data management to access. That puts us all on a unified front and allows us to achieve more quickly and efficiently.
Billy, want to go ahead?
So mine's, you two parts. One, you already have it. So you,
You already own it.
you already own this. Start using it. And two, it's the only way for you to get to continuously delivering value quickly to your customers. And in this world, if you're not delivering every 2 weeks or honestly every day, you're behind.
That's great.
Well, I was going to pick two, but since you said I had to limit it to one, I'm going to drop costs. It's a great factor, but I'm going to just say ease of use, because even if I had to pay for the tool, I would still pay for it, because it just integrates so well and so quickly with Visual Studio, with Azure, with any of the platforms I'm trying to deploy to, that it's hands down one of the easiest tools to use.
That's great. Sorry I limited you to one.
That's okay.
I would have to say automation. I mean, when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, when you get your pipeline set up and you're putting out 2 or 3 builds a day, and you're standing up machines when you need them, QA machines, test machines, even eventually pushing to production. I mean, that automation that you've set in place, it increases security, it limits the amount of issues you can have. It takes, the whole hands-on approach of deploying files to production out of it. So, getting to that automated constant flow from a development and operations side into a production environment is just a very powerful thing.
That's awesome. Automated, rapid deployment that's secure.
Absolutely.
I got it. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. Great panel. Thank you again to our attendees who just shared that session with us. We've got a great group here for the Q&A. I've got Mark Quickel with me from the panel, Pete Seidel as well from the panel. We should have Aaron Ward joining us again, and Jeff Fowler, our security strategist here at Planet Technologies. I want to encourage everybody, there's the Q&A pod down at the bottom. If we have any questions, which I'm sure you do, please let's go ahead and throw those questions into the Q&A pod. So the first question I think here is, security is often seen as a barrier to productivity and moving new solutions forward. How do we ensure that teams can keep moving forward when security is integrated into the typically high-speed world of DevOps?
So I'll take that one. So when you look at DevOps, and as the team mentioned in the panel a few minutes ago, really you've got to talk about people, processes, and tools, and all these things come together. And especially in the DevOps world, where it's such an accelerated pace all the time, the only way you can actually truly achieve, empowering your users, getting your teams up and running and moving fast, you've got to bake it in from the very beginning. You can't just bolt it on after the fact and expect things to work. When you give teams clear delineated swim lanes that they need to work within, and they understand that security is there from the foundational aspects of the DevOps process, of the culture of the organization, and getting everyone involved across the board, I mean, that's really the best way to approach making sure that things are done securely in the best manner when doing DevOps. Also, Microsoft did actually create a security kit for DevOps for Azure. And it helps address some of the typical security challenges. Change is the constant norm. DevOps has a wide range of responsibilities. There's lots of opportunities in the development space, as well as the teams themselves giving the autonomy they need to do to make sure they can move as quickly as possible. And when security is in there and baked in from the beginning, it really does help make things a whole lot easier across the board.
Great. Mark, Pete, you want to tag on that?
Well, I'll just add, I think it was kind of brought up in the video, but maybe it wasn't highlighted enough, is that by baking that security in, the tools enable that process pretty well. So if you have individuals in your group who understand the security and compliance ramifications of what it is that's trying to be developed, they can be added even as stakeholders to the project, and they can view code as it's checked in. We can develop test plans that go through different security checklists and that type of thing, and are all part of the actual check-in release pipeline. So it is definitely something that we want to be involving the right folks from the beginning, but the tools also provide those constraints if you're using the Azure DevOps tools, that is.
And to add on to that, DevSecOps is all about making sure that you know what processes you really need to focus on. It's a lot about making sure that the team that you have in place is proficient at what they need to do. I mean, you can give developers all of these tools, but if they're not entirely sure how to implement and how to use them, you're going to kind of get stuck in these gates. So making sure that your process is straight and you know what you need to implement and how to go through that can help facilitate the move to the DevOps scenarios.
So I got another question here that was actually sent to me directly. What advantages does DevOps boards provide over Planner? Why use one or the other?
I can jump in there briefly, but I'd be interested in hearing some perspectives too for those working in the federal space. Obviously, one of the reasons an organization might use Planner over Azure DevOps is simply because it's the only thing that's available to them in an organization, right? Part of Office 365, or they have a tight Office 365 integration there. I would say that both provide task tracking and a way to visualize tasks across the organization. But where the advantage comes on the Azure board side is it's coupling with the actual code that you're trying to develop. And that's why, Planner is definitely, it's an agile task management tool across all different types of projects, whether that be development, whether that be, even building construction or anything like that you might be trying to do in an iterative type of way. Whereas DevOps is more focused on code. And so the boards there, those tasks can actually be tied to releases and code check-ins so that developers have to say, I'm putting a piece of code functionality in here and it addresses, these particular user stories. And so there's definitely some advantage there and a little bit around customization. So again, in some cases, it might be around what tools are available to you. It might be where you're kind of working day to day, and it might be related to what types of projects you're working on.
There's also the option of using the service endpoints that various systems have. For instance, in Teams, you can actually expose your work items board from Azure DevOps into your Teams channel and everything. So you could use both Planner as well as your work items, and these service endpoints allow you to see how various work items are opened, how you can add comments to them that eventually show up in either a bug report or a comment history instead of a task. You can really integrate the two systems. So I think the benefit of having both Planner as well as VSTS is that you can leave the additional metadata for developers that are in their bugs and their tasks and their backlog items up to them, but you can also let the project managers, the planners, the folks who don't need all that detail have their own boards that are based on Planner. So they could utilize both tools without completely overlapping what each tool is supposed to do. And the service endpoints from Teams and other applications into the VSTS Azure DevOps system really does give you that ability to expose the information in both of them as well.
Again, I want to encourage everybody, if you have any questions, to go ahead and drop them in the pod towards the bottom of the screen. So one of the questions that I wanted to address, I know we addressed it pretty strongly during the panel and the presentation itself, but is DevOps fully available in government Azure, and are there any differences that folks should understand?
So right now, I believe, like we mentioned in the presentation, that it is mostly set up for, it's in GCC. GCC High has it coming soon, a quote, and it's probably set for delivery without about a year for secret. Most of the tools from the GCC and the GCC High perspective, you have the capability of doing cross-resource group pipelines. So there is the ability to be able to send information from a GCC instance to a GCC High instance if you have both authentication tokens on either side. So there is some communication there if the instance is not available to you in GCC High. And then obviously there's other ways of getting code out of your repositories and your repos into your various networks if you're air-gapped.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, there are a few limitations too. For example, Azure DevOps, uh, the way you tie or federate that to an Azure government tenant is somewhat limited compared to, say, what you can do in commercial today. However, you can create pipelines to both environments and deploy your code to Azure. It's just the process is a little bit different, and the way you authenticate and get in is a little bit different.
So I think one of the areas I want to double down on, guys, is, and I think this ties into that same question, so we addressed it, I think, fairly strongly in the panel as well, but since we got this question, let me go back to that one, which is, what's a great place to start, right? Maybe I'm doing DevOps on premises today. Maybe I don't really have a great process in place today. What's a great way for me to get started? And I know we mentioned in the panel as well that there's some of this that's free, so it's a pretty easy start. So I'm not sure if anybody wants to address that. Yeah, so the question would be, what's the best way to start? Where's the best place to start with this DevOps?
Well, so I think we talked a little bit yesterday about Azure PaaS services and how several of them were free to start. And so you could have developers in your group who are going out, they're trying out Azure websites. They're trying out Azure Search. What capabilities does that bring to my organization that are going to bring huge developmental and operational efficiencies to the team? And then they can actually tie that to an Azure DevOps subscription. If they have MSDN accounts, they're free. Small teams up to 5 get access, and then your stakeholders get access. And so by doing that, they can actually develop all these solutions and create some pilots, proof of concepts, that type of thing. And then once there's sort of a consensus that that's the path forward, those services can be converted to paid services where needed. So if your development team needs to go above 5, then you can license your users if they're not MSDN users. If you want to convert your PaaS free services to paid services, you can do that, and you don't lose any of your data. And that's hugely valuable because you might be in there practicing different types of things, like creating backlog items, creating different types of team projects and configurations around those projects, creating different types of templates that you want to share for project tracking. And none of that information is lost. It's all there to roll over into a production type capacity.
Terrific. Pete, you have something you want to add?
So, I mean, Mark makes some excellent points. And my only suggestion would be is that you don't have to run before you walk. You really want to make sure that you want to get excited about the software and using the process. So, get a couple of developers in there, give them some time. Like Mark mentioned, you get, 5 free licenses, or if you already have MSDN licenses, your work is, you don't have to pay for it initially. You have people that can get in there and play around, try some processes that you have, get developers checking code into your repos, get your Git flow working or your branching process working, set up gates so that you can have approvals associated with your, with your production and how you're building your code, and let your developers start really discovering the power of the tool itself. I mean, from the very top-down perspective, at first glance, it looks easy to use, and it is very easy to use, but it's also extremely robust. I mean, there is a lot that you can do with custom build machines. There's a lot that you can do with service endpoints and PowerShell remoting into these DevTest labs that you create. And once you realize all of these kind of different practical applications for the technology that's out there, you get to see the bigger picture. You get to see all of these things starting to come together. And when they start coming together like that, you start developing a plan. And again, Agile is a lot about the team, about the plan, about where you want to be and how you get there. And when you start seeing these milestones that you're finding from all this software, you can start building yourself a path. But none of that's going to happen if you don't get in there and see, what it's about, how it works, how does it integrate with Teams, how does it integrate with other O365 services, and what options are available to you. There's also a lot of great tutorials out there and a lot of great videos and classes that you can take to get your developers ramped up there. Most of them, some of them are, free of cost. But getting excited about it, seeing what's possible, and then implementing that into your process is really going to be your first step.
And Aaron, to that end, Pete brings up the training pieces of that. You want to talk a little bit about the DevOps piece that is an engagement option within the Planet ECR assessment?
Yeah, so one of the great things that we have within our ECR is an add-on for development operations, which goes over everything we've been talking about. The biggest aspect of this, though, is it's really guiding an organization and their development workforce from endpoint to endpoint. So where they're at today to how they take advantage of development operations within Azure Cloud specifically, and leveraging everything from workflows to options of looking at Azure Vault, Key Vault, and everything that has to do with agility and working within those confines of development operations. A lot of the great things, a lot of the customer feedback we receive when we do this engagement is just that the developers now have a lot more access to compute that they never had access to, being able to quickly develop net new ideas is a valid option for them without having to deal with your typical infrastructure bureaucracy that usually happens. And then the other aspect is from a security standpoint, being able to secure this environment by leveraging how they have implemented Azure and their role-based access, et cetera, and being able to tie that all together. So the engagement that we have from a Planet perspective is very valuable to organizations that are looking at how do I transform or modernize my development operations to take advantage of the cloud.
That's great. I think we have one last question here. How have you seen stakeholder licenses used in organizations you've worked with?
I can address that one, Steve. So stakeholders, as I mentioned earlier, are a great no-cost solution for people that aren't directly doing development in your organization. So they have access to a lot of the Azure boards or backlogs, as they were referred to in the previous iteration, capabilities. There's certain things that they are not able to do, but they're able to participate in a lot of, so we have individuals in our organization as we're developing applications who are doing, quality assurance testing, who are doing sort of business analysis up front, and we want them to be able to contribute to the project as much as they can without having to, track things in Excel spreadsheets and hand them to us, and then we try to have to enter everything. And because these can be accessed directly in Teams or other types of tools, as Aaron mentioned earlier, we can now work together on a team. We can see as new things are added, we can be made aware of it, and we can track that together, developers, stakeholders, and work towards that completion. They're not going to have access to things like repositories from the perspective of going in, looking at code and artifacts and those types of things, but they don't really need to either. The one other area that we see stakeholders get involved with sometimes is around the pipeline capabilities of the platform. So, there might be a development manager, or there might be a business owner or someone like that that needs to approve deployments before they get pushed out. So that way developers aren't just out there pushing things to a production environment, maybe even accidentally, and causing some sort of chaos. And so they get involved from that perspective too, to help with the sort of brokering of that process.
From a limitation perspective, there, in addition to what Mark had mentioned, some of the troubles that we've run into around the stakeholder licensing specifically has been that some of the project managers are in there as stakeholders, and they still need the ability to modify areas and iterations to set up their sprints and configure the project as well as configure the team. And that functionality currently isn't allowed, at least on the commercial side, for the stakeholders. Now, they did just get access to, like Mark was mentioning, the build pipelines as well. So in those kinds of scenarios, sometimes we just bounce licenses around. A lot of times a license will be allocated, a basic license will be allocated to a developer who's no longer on a project there anymore, or is not currently working on anything. Well, we can swap them up to a stakeholder and then temporarily switch over the the other licenses. There's a lot of flexibility with how the licenses are set up, and you usually work around some of the limitations that they do have.
Fantastic. So Jeff, Aaron, Mark, Pete, thank you very much for joining. Thank you again to our attendees. We have one session left in our Planet Gov Cloud Azure and Office 365 Summit. We have one session left. That session is number 7. It's looking back and planning forward. You absolutely don't want to miss this session. This is an open dialogue with the folks who have attended, at least and been a panelist for at least one previous, if not both previous summits. And we're talking about, hey, maybe where we got it right, maybe where we got it wrong, maybe some future things we should be looking forward to. So this is a great interactive dialogue. You absolutely don't want to miss it. Thanks very much for attending. I believe that session will start in about 5 minutes.